So here's the thing. Climbing Mount Everest from the north side is a very different experience. There are fewer climbers, fewer rescues, and far fewer second chances. Normally, this climb takes weeks, but today we're going to trace the entire North Route in just a few minutes, from base camp on the cold, empty Tibetan side, all the way along the exposed summit ridge to the top of the world. And every section we're about to move through has taken lives, not because of crowds or chaos, but because on this side of the mountain, one small mistake is usually the last one. So let's begin. On screen now, you're looking at Everest Base Camp on the Tibetan side, sitting at about 5,200 meters. It's a scattered collection of tents on the Rongbuk Glacier, dry and exposed to constant wind. From here, climbers begin a long, slow trek up the Rongbuk Glacier toward Advanced Base Camp, ABC, which sits at 6,400 meters. Watch the path on screen as we move upward. It's not a straight line. The route winds through moraine fields and across broken glacier terrain. This is already higher than almost any mountain in North America. ABC is the staging point. It's where climbers wait for weather windows, it's where oxygen is checked and rechecked, and it's the last place most people will ever see a vehicle. From this angle, you can already see the north face rising above. A vast, tilted wall of rock, snow, and ice that climbers will have to push through in stages. And honestly, just getting to ABC is exhausting. But what's really different here is the silence. No helicopters, no infrastructure, just you and the mountain. Now we move to the first serious obstacle, the North Col. See the steep glacier ramp toward the North Col on screen. Fixed ropes trace the only viable climb line. It's a long, steep, icy climb that gains hundreds of vertical meters from Advanced Base Camp. The gradient is sharp, around 50 to 60 degrees in places, and the entire section is glacial ice. The North Col sits at 7,000 meters. That's the altitude where your body begins to deteriorate faster than it can recover. But the climb itself is what makes this section dangerous. It's early in the expedition, climbers are still adjusting to altitude, and this slope doesn't forgive mistakes. If someone loses their footing, if a crampon fails, they slide. The angle is just steep enough that stopping becomes nearly impossible. Several climbers and high-altitude workers have fallen on this section over the years. And here's the thing, rescues on the North Col are difficult. Helicopters can't operate at this altitude on the Tibetan side. There are no backup teams waiting nearby. If something goes wrong, the people with you are the only help you'll get. This is where climbers start to understand what the North Route really is. Once you reach the top of the North Col, you arrive at Camp 1. From above, see how Camp 1 sits on a narrow shelf, exposed to constant wind. Notice how open the terrain is. There's no shelter here, no rocks to block the wind, just open ice and a long drop on either side. At 7,000 meters, most climbers are now using supplemental oxygen, at least intermittently. The air pressure here is less than 40% of what it is at sea level, and the cold is constant. Temperatures regularly drop to -30 or -35 degrees Celsius at night. What makes this camp dangerous is that this is where climbers start to weaken, and from here, there's no going back for help quickly. If someone gets seriously sick, the only real option is to descend immediately. This is the section where climbers learn whether they can continue. Some turn around here, the ones who don't move higher. From Camp 1, the route continues upward along a long, gradually rising slope toward Camp 2, which sits at roughly 7,500 meters. As you can see from this overhead view, the terrain here is deceptively simple. It's a broad, snow-covered ridge. No technical climbing, no ladders, just walking slowly at extreme altitude. But that simplicity is part of the problem. There are no landmarks, no clear features. At these altitudes, even experienced climbers can become disoriented when wind and visibility drop. The lack of landmarks makes route finding extremely difficult, and the wind here is brutal. The north face is fully exposed to the jet stream, with sustained winds often exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. If you're caught in the open during a storm, there's nowhere to hide. You either push through it or you stop moving. And if you stop moving at 7,500 meters in a storm, you don't start again. Camp 2 is also where many climbers begin experiencing summit fever. They've come this far, they've invested so much, and the idea of turning back, even when conditions are bad, becomes unthinkable. But this is exactly where decisions need to be made, because everything above Camp 2 gets harder. Now we reach Camp 3, perched at 8,300 meters on a steep, rocky slope just below the ridgeline. Below you now is Camp 3. Looking up toward the Death Zone ridge, you're now above 8,000 meters. The human body cannot survive here long term. You're not adapting anymore. You're dying, slowly. Camp 3 is the last camp before the summit push. Most climbers spend only a few hours here, resting, hydrating as much as possible, checking their oxygen supplies. What makes Camp 3 particularly dangerous is the altitude combined with the exposure. If a storm rolls in, you're pinned. You can't descend safely in whiteout conditions on this terrain, and you can't stay here long without running out of oxygen. In 2006, a British climber named David Sharp, a solo climber, spent too long at high altitude without enough supplemental oxygen. He became too weak to descend from the upper mountain and died in a limestone alcove on the North Route. The point is, at Camp 3, mistakes compound fast. A torn glove, a leaking oxygen regulator, a decision to wait an extra hour, and rescue from here is functionally impossible. From Camp 3, climbers push toward the ridgeline and encounter the first step. On screen, the first step highlighted mixed terrain of rock and ice at about 8,500 meters, angled at around 50 degrees. The first step isn't technically difficult by climbing standards, but at 8,500 meters, everything is difficult. And here's the thing, this is where the exposure really begins. To your left, as you climb, the north face drops nearly 3,000 meters to the glacier below. What's critical to understand about the first step is that it's not the hardest section, but it's early in the summit push. Climbers are still moving upward, still hopeful, and that means they're not yet thinking about retreat, but they should be, because everything after the first step is harder, and the way back down is the same way they came up. Now we arrive at the second step. Watch the camera tilt up to the second step ladder. You can see the aluminum frame installed by Chinese climbers in 1975. This is the most famous and most dangerous obstacle on the entire North Route. A nearly vertical rock face about 30 meters tall, sitting at 8,610 meters. Climbing the second step means clipping into a fixed line, grabbing onto that ladder, and pulling yourself up, rung by rung, at an altitude where your brain is barely functioning. Your oxygen mask fogs, your gloves slip on the cold metal, your legs shake, you stop every few rungs to breathe, and there's a line, because this is a bottleneck. Even on the less crowded North Route, climbers bunch up here. Some wait 30 minutes, some wait an hour, and while you're waiting, you're not moving, you're burning oxygen, you're getting colder, the descent is worse. Coming down the ladder, you're facing outward. You can see the full drop below you. Your crampons scrape for footholds, you're exhausted, you're hypoxic, and one mistake ends everything. What people often don't understand is that the second step isn't just a physical challenge, it's a decision point. If you're already exhausted getting up the ladder, you should turn around, because you still have to get down it. And the descent is when most people die. Just past the second step, maybe 80 vertical meters higher, you encounter the third step. You're looking at it now from above. It's a shorter rock band, maybe 10 to 15 meters, but still steep and exposed. By this point, most climbers have been above 8,000 meters for hours. Oxygen is running low, exhaustion is setting in, and the summit is so close, maybe 200 meters away, that the instinct is to keep pushing. The third step is where small mistakes start happening. A crampon catches, a climber forgets to clip in. These sound like minor errors. But at 8,690 meters, there are no minor errors. And the third step is where that becomes obvious. After the third step, the terrain levels out slightly. You're now on the summit ridge, a narrow, exposed spine of rock and ice at roughly 8,800 meters. On the summit ridge now, notice how narrow the spine is, exposed on both sides. On the North Ridge summit area, sharp drops fall away to the Kangshung face and the eastward slopes toward Tibet, leaving climbers on a narrow spine of ice and snow. And here's what makes this section so dangerous. It looks easy, it's mostly flat, there are no big obstacles, just walking. But you're at 8,800 meters, you've been climbing for hours, and the summit is right there, maybe 50 vertical meters above you, so climbers push, they ignore the signs, they keep moving, and then, on the way back, they collapse. In 1996, the same year as the disaster on the south side, several climbers died on the North Route during a sudden storm. The summit ridge became impassable, visibility dropped to nothing, and climbers who were already weak simply stopped. One of the hardest truths about Everest's North Route is that most deaths happen on the descent, after summiting. When people think the hard part is over, because the summit ridge looks safe, but it's not. You're still in the death zone, you're still one mistake away from never coming down. And then you reach it, the summit of Mount Everest, 8,849 meters above sea level. You're looking at it now from the approach, a small snowy dome, prayer flags left by previous climbers, the highest point on Earth. Most people stay for 10, maybe 15 minutes. They take photos, they call home on a satellite phone, and then they start down. Because the summit is not the finish, it's the halfway point. And this is where the North Route becomes truly unforgiving. You still have to reverse the third step, descend the ladder at the second step, navigate the first step, cross the exposed ridgeline back to Camp 3, all while running on fumes. Your oxygen is nearly empty. You've been awake for 20 hours. Your core temperature is dropping. Every year, climbers summit Everest's North Route and then die within hours. Not because of avalanches or rockfall, not because of sudden storms. They die because they ran out of time, or oxygen, or strength. If you can't get yourself down, you stay. So that's the North Route. From advanced base camp at 6,400 meters, up the icy slope of the North Col, across the long, wind-blasted ridges to Camp 2, through the death zone at Camp 3, over the steps, along the summit ridge, and finally to the top. It's not as crowded as the south side, it's not as chaotic, but it's just as deadly, because on this side of the mountain, rescue is almost impossible, mistakes are final.